All right, so we have an hour ahead of us to prepare our summary and that we will be presenting to the Councillor of State. So we need to finish our summary work that we began yesterday, and Eric, Elizabeth, and Gilles and Marie were working very hard late into the night and early this morning to wrap it up. So let me remind you of a few points. So it was River, Lake, and City, which is the theme of this session, the conditions for a successful alliance. So that is the topic that we really need to focus on. So the question is then, what are the conditions then, and what were our observations of how those conditions are met, and of course, and above all, what are the possibilities for transposing this to other territories and contexts. So there has been some work done on this by Eric and Gilles in particular. Eric, I guess you would like to say a few things, and then we will hand around the microphone. And remember, we will want you to be as concise as possible when the Councillor of State arrives, when you give your suggestion. Thank you. Hello, everyone. So just an introduction. We have a great respect for universities, but we are not a university. We are a forum for thinking and proposing. And those who are coming to be with us this morning, that's what they expect of us. And that is exactly what we want to do, because we gain understanding, but we can't just stop there. It's not just about understanding. After a while, the understanding, we understand so much, but we are cut off from the realities of many territories, particularly those that have great tensions and conflict. And so this has been a very interesting session, and I know I'm repeating myself, but I know it was very complicated to put this session together, and it's so fantastic, the work that has been done by Gilles and his teams. And now it's time to produce. We have to move forward. It's like a bicycle. If you don't move forward, you fall over. And I have seen other groups fail because they didn't move forward or make concrete proposals. So we want our restitution session to have two parts. First of all, we're going to be speaking to an exceptional person. I know him fairly well. Not just because he's a Councillor of State, but he is a Swiss Councillor of State. So it's not like the French Councillors of State. So this person has some very concrete responsibilities, and he takes action. And we have met with him several times, in fact. And so he's a man of action, in fact. So he's like a minister, the equivalent of a minister. And he wants things to move forward. And so this is why we want to ensure that our presentation to him, instead of just summing up what we saw, he knows that. So I suggest we have two main parts to our presentation. So first of all, we're going to say what were the lessons that we learned about, and that we have observed on your side, the alliance between the city, the rivers, and the lake. We have observed that it's a success. It doesn't mean that everything is perfect and that it's not missing some features. And so we will be expressing ourselves about what we believe is missing. So, for example, understanding the will of the people and ordinary citizens. So that will be our first part. Now, I won't go into the detail. We heard a lot of different themes, soft, hard biodiversity, et cetera. We'll give him a brief wrap up on that. But we will say things such as, it works here, but could it work better? Second part of our session with him, how can this excellence that we have observed, that was born of some very specific factors, okay, few people, no demographic pressure, no hard climate pressures, no violence, and so the complete opposite of what we see almost everywhere else. It's a bit like an island, like Switzerland has been in the world. And so what are the conditions for that? And our conviction then is this can only exist if there is sharing. Well, what are the conditions for the sharing? We've talked with Jacqueline about the Lake Chad and others. So what you have put together here in Switzerland with very particular methodologies, your relations with the academics and everyone's involved, well, is this transposable? So, well, we'll have to do this. I want you now to tell me, how can this alliance be transposed? So if you want to speak, you're going to need the microphone. So please be concise and to the point. Julian. Okay, just very quickly then. If I were going to develop a measure, it would be transportation on the lake. We lacked a bit of information about the flow across the border that's in the waters. So I don't know, some kind of a flat-bottom boat or something with cars to go across or some other form of transportation. But something environmentally useful as well to reduce car traffic around the lake. Also, to get people onto the lake, so to take the perspective of the lake, to raise their awareness of the environmental issues, to really get them more deeply into the lake, if I can put it that way. That the boats themselves can be a tool for communication. While people are waiting for the boat or while they're on the boat, they could get this information. And so I think that we can provide this information, and by developing all of this, I think it could help lead people toward a different legal status and not just a body of water with a national boundary running through it. Well, so it's true that we didn't talk about navigation much, and we do have an international agreement on navigation. And I do agree with you, Julian. It's an excellent idea to say that, we use this element. So we are riding on the back of that lake, and what are we doing? and yes, it all seems very 19th century. Your navigation on the lake. Another word I think you've all noticed. There were a few areas that we decided not to cover during this week. We did have to make choices, and so yes, there were some topics that we didn't really touch on. About how, first of all, how the general public is consulted, how to understand what they think, and how to get them more involved in the process. So it's true that we didn't touch on that. In fact. And so, we do know that something is done, but we would like to know what is done and how efficient this consultation of the public is. Catherine? No, sorry, Daniel first. Well, at the very beginning of our session, somebody said something. They said, you can read in our silences the points where we have problems. So it's true that in the title here we didn't really stipulate what the problem is, and so it was up to us to look for clues in the silences. So there were a few of those that I've found and that I mentioned yesterday, but there are a few other things. It was the question of the governance. You're an alliance. We heard a great deal about how you coordinate your efforts, but it seems like there's a real gymnastics going on here to move beyond the federal line. In fact, you can often do without the federal level. You're lucky in that sense. And so, as Erik has said, you're lucky. But some of the directives, if they don't fit what you need to do, as the Federation might be dictating certain things, but they don't always fit what you need to do. So this is something to be clarified. Then there was the definition of projects. We've the whole scheduling, the timelines weren't too clear. We heard some of the budget numbers. 3.6 billion euros across the 30 years to come is a bit hard to understand. So I think it's governance is something that could be clarified. Thank you, Daniel. Let's hear from Catherine now. Thank you. So now, from what I was able to see, you are always here in our hearts, Catherine. And okay, thank you, Erik. I know that, and I am there with all my heart too. So, trying to keep things very concrete here. I think yes, communication actions are required and an analysis of how we speak about the water, and we touched on that yesterday. There's a tension between the engineering side and the ecosystemic approach. So there's a desire to be holistic, to see what can be done to improve movements, include water, integrate water in the city. But I think we need to work on the vocabulary. When we talk about exploiting the water, this is coming from engineering. What would happen if we change that vocabulary? When we're analyzing the flows and the movements, when we talk about circularity and circulation, I think that we can arrive at a more powerful relationship between people and the environment and water if we do that. And looking at the underground, the depths, a lot of what we heard sounded very engineering heavy. how can we change the vocabulary if we were looking at for more natural things? When we were talking about, the bounty of the earth, the riches of the earth. So I think we need to think harder about the vocabulary and to make sure that this aligns with the values of the Swiss and what you're trying to put forward. Okay, thank you, Catherine. If I could say something about this point. Just 10 minutes ago with Julian, we were talking about the language shapes the way one thinks. If you use such a word, a given word, that word sets a whole framework for your thinking. And in the same way, and this is my obsession, or one of my obsessions, is that if women are not present in digital programming, it will remain a very masculine world and a domination over women. And it's there has been so much hard-earned gains for women, but they will come to nothing if we don't get more women in coding and programming. The devil can be hidden in the best intentions because of the mentality that is framed by the words that you use. So, Dominique, yes, it's true that it's not just for Geneva that you making recommendations, and we know that, there can be sudden changes. There could be something linked to climate or COVID or even a change of elected officials. So we have to be careful about that. And for me, I think we need to listen to those who are silent, because lobbies are always built up around projects. So, the farming world, the owners, the industries, but the climate and the environment and the water are silent, along with many people. So no matter what the project, I think it has to be very pluridisciplinary with multiple forms of knowledge. It can't just be engineering projects. We need architects, biologists, but we also need anthropologists, historians, other people who know how to tell the story. And so any projects need to take their basis from that. So everything has to be pluridisciplinary. Yes, that is something that has absolutely changed my life, is a silent spring, that absence of birds. So the book Silent Spring, so, when we, we only think of ourselves, and we, barely saw what was happening because if we don't notice that suddenly there are no more birds, it could be too late. Well, that's true that Daniel has pointed out what is written in invisible ink. With the Swiss, yes, it's very true. And there's one thing that, and we, from our Council of State, from the Vaud Canton, that was saying we don't necessarily have the same priorities around the same between the different cantons. And so if your recommendations, if you say we need to be more clear on priorities, okay, she wants us to say it, in fact, because it will help her get across her priorities. So this is Hamid. So let me apologize in advance that I missed part of the talks yesterday, but I will say what I believe is an important recommendation. When we look at the River, Lake, and City Alliance, so we know that they are all interlinked. I would like to insist on international cooperation. Okay, Hamid, I would like that to be in the second part of our summary. Okay, so you please keep your notes, and we'll get back to you, of course. And I do want to congratulate you on one of the most magnificent hats I've ever seen. But your point on international cooperation, yes, I just want to put that in the second part of our talk. So we'll hand over to Pascal. What I believe is important is to explain the very unique situation of Geneva in the world, and that it can serve as an international platform, and it can help us develop a diplomacy around this topic. It's very unique what you have here. Secondly, that this relationship, the river, lake, and city, should not just be a showcase, but rather to, with this success story, and thanks to your methodology that works, that you can be, maybe a watchdog is too strong a word, but in your position, you are in a position to be showing the way. And so I believe that, in a rich country where things are working, that there nonetheless changes are underway. So you have this platform of your success that can become a model that needs to be promoted. And perhaps also use some of your symbols, such as the Red Cross and neutrality. So perhaps we need a Red Cross for rivers and the neutrality of the Swiss. In a book that I am working on right now, and some of you have contributed chapters, I am working on this notion. So after having traveled the world, I come back to Europe, and the question that I ask after seeing the Tagus and the Garonne rivers, for example, what if there were no more temperate climates? What if they disappear? The threat is not exotic anymore. The threat is now at Europe's doorstep. So even the most privileged populations are beginning to see the signs of the difficulties that currently we consider to be other people's problems. Now, for example, in Brittany, we know that the waters are polluted by mostly by the cattle raising, livestock raising. There's no lack of water, but there's a water quality issue. And Claire. So I have a suggestion, very much in line with what we've heard. Can we not take advantage of this alliance to test a crisis scenario in 2050? So that's tomorrow, 2050. In applied research, this is something that we do a great deal, in fact, to push the scenarios to their limit, because sometimes this helps us to better analyze the gaps, the things that are missing, the things that are not said, as we have just said. Just let me comment on that. Now, when we were in Senegal, there's the university there, that is very much oriented toward forecasting. And yes, so we are working on scenarios called Geneva 2050, looking at different potential crises. But unfortunately, I find they're using too much greenwashing vocabulary, and I left a committee there. But I would like to hear what the Councillor of State would have to say about that. That thanks to these models, serious models, and certain difficult potential scenarios, I would like, definitely raise that up. Okay, let's move on to the second part. So, okay. Wait a minute. Okay, very brief, Luis.
Very brief and pragmatic. First of all, I just would like to thank you all for the opportunity to be here, join this very productive meeting and look around to all the projects that are happening here in Geneva. So I'm very grateful for that. That's my first message.
We are also. You became a member just from the very first minute. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming from this country, which is very dear to my heart. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And again, I'm a visitor, let's say, for the first meeting, but I learned a lot, and I also think I do have a bit to share as well. And one of the things that I believe, thinking about recommendations, we're talking about river, lake, and city, and I saw a huge potential between all the projects to condense everything, and that goes towards what Dominique said as well, into synergistic effects. So everything that's going to happen in one project, if you are doing the correction of the Rhone, will benefit a series of other components of the environment of the rivers that will reflect in the lake. And I think, you can develop a showcase to actually demonstrate how these cascade of events create the synergistic effects that can benefit a lot of different components. And the second thing that I heard in the meetings is the discussion around parks, river parks. And this is one thing I've been discussing for quite a long time, particularly in areas in South America. And there is a huge challenge to develop that because conservation laws and legislation are not meant to develop parks based on water boundaries. They are meant to develop parks based on terrestrial boundaries. And eventually, this is something that with everything that has been happening here, Gilles, can be as well kind of pushed towards to be a showcase indeed for the world, because this is one of the things that I think there's huge potential also, and one thing that we definitely need, like if we want to protect fresh waters indeed.
Merci. Corinne, rapidement, et puis je propose.
So, Corinne, just very quickly, and then we'll have to switch into our second portion of our discussion. Well, I think we need to revive the memory of the river and insist on the cultural diversity so that the population along the river and the lake consider it again their shared common lake beyond the administrative boundaries. It would also help to develop a sense of the risk and learning to live with a degree of risk. And it would allow a better communication about what you intend to do with your third correction. And there could be a roaming exhibition that would involve various stakeholders to remind people of their family history. There could be work on old photos and testimonials, things like that we didn't have time to talk about this time, and get historians involved in your committees alongside engineers, landscapers, architects, etc. Elizabeth? Well, okay, all right. Well, okay. Let's hand over to Elizabeth. So I'd like to come back to that topic of governance, because we often mention the CNR for its integrated management, but it's from the source to the Mediterranean, not just on the French side. And I remain rather surprised that the third correction has not been worked on with the lake, in fact, and on the French side. So in terms of governance, I think there's a huge improvement to be made there, because a river should be managed in its entirety. Okay, now, Hamed, we have the perfect transition to... Okay, wait a minute. Let me sum up the first... Okay, let me sum up the first part. Okay, so, first of all, governance. Okay, that's clear. Okay. And so when we were with the strategic committee of the CNR to visit the glacier, 2/3 had never really been out to the source of the river. After 20 years in the business, how can you be in that business of management without having gone up to the glacier? So there is this mastery on the one side, because, and the people in the valley have never been down to the Camargue, to the mouth of the Rhone. And so it means that, well, the lake is a stage. So governance is the first thing. Second, unity. Third, to see how all of this comes together, because this is something, less we use nature, the more we destroy it in a way. I talked about those dead things and these dead objects that we use it. And so here but we have to take an approach that comes from both history and the future. And we have incredible diversity here. So we've got France on the one side, Jacobian. Here, it's very much territorially governed. So how can this work together? So these are key questions. Then there's opinion, listening to those who are silent, even if there are contradictions in that silence, changing the vocabulary. And I really like the idea of pushing that crisis scenario. I like that idea a lot. There are some first signs. So we talk about the weak signals, but they aren't weak. In fact, they are screaming at us, but are we listening? Now, the second part, Hamed. Okay, yes. I am wearing the African hat in more sense than one. Elizabeth began to, stepped on my toes there a bit. Fortunately, not with high heels. But thank you for your summary of the first part. But I'm going to repeat perhaps a bit. So international cooperation. We're not seeing much international cooperation. Beyond perhaps Franco-Swiss cooperation. I believe we need to really be activists for peace around river basins. We know that wars are coming over the resource of the river basins, and which is why we need a more international governance that shouldn't be so fragmented. So what I would like to recommend then is that, Switzerland has a lot to gain by pushing for a more broadly integrated relationship across the entire river basin. And it's time now to do that. As Elizabeth has said, there are some touchy subjects, difficult subjects that people don't necessarily want to talk about. But if we don't talk about them, they can get out of control. So we must pacify the river basin space, and so I think that's something. So we've got the CPEL, but I think it needs to be broadened to the entire scale.
Juste réagir et vous donner une...
If I can just react and make an announcement. I had planned to end with the Geneva Water Hub to have a publication on trans-border management of water in this basin, because we have 40 tools and institutions, a kaleidoscope. You could say something that's been built up gradually. We have to have an overall view. This publication, as there were many things to do, we weren't able to complete this application. Some of the expressions in it were a bit clumsy, so it's going to be done by mid-October, and it'll be translated in English. You'll be receiving it. You'll be able to, I hope to be able to take it home with you today, but this is a subject we haven't talked about much during this session. Hello. First of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me and enabling me to participate in this week and the very enriching discussions in smaller groups and in groups and also one-to-one. Concerning how we can develop and showcase this alliance internationally, I think one important thing is the idea of twinning. I don't know that we should talk about twinning or partnership. I don't know exactly the right word. And then a lot of questions will be asked, which I think will be beneficial for the alliance here. If we organize a twinning, it has to be with another lake, an international lake, ideally. This also means we could perhaps associate the French part and also locally involve the two countries to begin with. If we want to have a transverse approach in terms of the different disciplines with the urbanism from Geneva and the fishermen and the NGOs, that's why it would be enriching here locally and to suggest the creation of twinning with one of the major international lakes. One stumbling block would be the timescale and the deadlines, because partnership can't just be a one-shot. It has to take place over a long period of time. So I think this would be a good approach. It should be a recommendation. And I would link this recommendation to the vocabulary. We've just heard about the term, the war of water. We have to be careful. Where a war of water is frightening, maybe we should talk about peace thanks to water or through water, so we could bring a more positive value to people. We're talking about creating a calm framework that provides safety. Thank you very much. Cabine. Just a quick word. It's true that that would be quite something to have a twinning between the two extremes of the planetary system. In other words, a twinning between the Lake Geneva and Lake Chad. That would be, we would have everything there. You can imagine you have the two extremes. You can imagine that? For those of you who visited Lake Chad, I went to Lake Chad with an escort. It was a bit frightening. I came back alive, but it was quite something. It's not quite like being in Lake Geneva. When you go to Lake Chad, you move towards Niger, and there are Boko Haram, and not far away, lots of other people, the sons of bitches from other places as well. Cabine, over to you. I wanted to go further into the idea of archaeologist about the cultural aspect. I was saying that the cultural aspect, I think, is a very important aspect. I haven't heard much talk about showcasing the possibility of being able to produce more cultural communication here in this city of peace. It is important. We shouldn't be afraid to say that water has caused a lot of wars. I can give you 2 or 3 examples. I lived for Egypt in 14 years. When Adat was murdered, it was because the Muslim Brotherhood had discovered that there was a secret clause in the agreement he'd signed with Israel, in this clause, he said he committed to give water to Israel. And it is because of this secret clause that made the Muslim Brotherhood absolutely furious, and they killed him on the Mubarak when he fell. This was because most of the people in the Tahrir Square were the people who had the least water, and every day they become more and more numerous. That's why there were more and more people. It was because of water. That's why it brought Mubarak down. And if you look at Merkel in 2011, in the war of Syria, which was caused because Turkey didn't use its water properly, there was a lot of drought in the north of Syria. People went southwards, the prices went up, and so a good part of the population revolted against the authorities. The Westerners who didn't understand the problem thought that they should use this opportunity to fight the Syrian president. This led to the greatest mass movement of refugees ever seen to Europe. And this is what disrupted a large number of governments, as you know, in Europe. A lot of European countries were destabilized, including Germany with Merkel, who was very open to this situation. So the problem in Syria is water, and this problem of water caused millions of refugees to move, and this destabilized Europe in turn. A lot of the repercussions we're seeing in Europe are due to the water crisis in Syria. So a city like Geneva, which brings together the river, lake, and city in a symbiosis, should be sending out much more messages to the outside world from this city, which is a historic and international city where we have the UN, so that we can, where the idea is for everybody to live together in peace. And we need to associate water and peace. If I can just say a few words, I'm not going to come the strategic analysis of cabinet. I don't have that competence. It's just to say that one form of governance that is at work here is cultural governance, because Corinne has mentioned this and cabinet has said this again. Do you think it's just by chance that a landscaper as sensitive as Bertrand Vignal was chosen by the Waldensians and the Valois to bring his contribution? Erik wasn't there, but do you think it's just by chance? Do you think it's just by chance that it's the same people from Lyon, or he's from Paris or Lyon, I'm not sure. Anyway, he works in Paris and Lyon. It's not by chance that he came to Geneva using a different vocabulary for water in the city. For me, sensitive governance is at work here, and this is the most important thing, just as much as political governance. And maybe this will take precedence in an emergency situation over political governance. If you allow me, just concerning the cultural aspect, I am also struck by not a desert of cultural manifestations, but a lack of links between the cultural manifestations and what is at stake in Geneva. And when I see that one of the greatest worldwide jazz festivals in Montreux represents globalization of music, this globalization, this brotherhood of music. So we could perhaps have this element. Maybe we could imagine in a world, as you need to know, you have to realize what this means. The enemy of our enemies is music and life. In other words, rivers. So the attacks against OMVS is an attack against life. This assertion of music that we see here is capital, right next to the capital of peace, is a very strong element on a very personal level, combined with what I can see from the world of music. I'll maybe call some of my friends in Montreux so that they can defend musicians. So a twinning of the Montreux Festival and the Saint-Louis Festival? Yes, that kind of thing. Why not? Yes, why not? That kind of twinning. I like to talk about what you say about twinning. Often twinnings very often make it possible to reduce the level of corruption, first of all, and secondly, there is a double learning process between the North and South. The people learn from each other and between schools as well. With the microphone, cabinet, please. With the microphone. Microphone, please, cabinet. I was talking with the mayor of Geneva. I was talking with the curator of the museum. He said he was invited by Youssou N'Dour to go to Senegal to the Saint Louis Festival in Abidjan to participate in the Urban Music Festival. And I didn't have time, but I said to him, you need to be able to launch a cultural hub so that we can talk about and exchange these values to do with water. 90% of diseases in our country are waterborne diseases. Microphone, please. This idea of twinning is a great idea. Above and beyond the idea of twinning of Lake Chad, I think we could do Cambodia and Latin America as well, Titiwaka, for example. Like we have a double twinning through music as well, and also this possibility creating these exchanges through culture. Also, Vienne Festival in France as well. We could structure in that way, and this would make Lake Geneva a meeting place once more. Let me say once more what strikes me very much, and I'll try to do it in a novel. That's why I'm working on this a great deal. Our enemies, they have three enemies, which are linked: women, music, and rivers. Those are the three enemies, not by chance. These are all symbols of life. It seems to me that in the discussion about the role of Geneva, it seems to me, in fact, that what strikes me is that we have everything we need in the room, and we could do a working session on this. Cabinet works on the water as a factor for peace, Geneva as a city of peace, and CNR, which has been supporting IFGR ever since the beginning. We could use this river as an example and show Geneva as being a place where there is we can define a new role for lakes and river basins worldwide and regionally, as the Olympics do for sport, for example. Rather than giving a recommendation to the city of Geneva, I think we, as IFGR with OMVS, as a very clear example of a place where this has already been set up in a way. We have everything we need here to be able to use Geneva as a lever to show the entire world what can be done. And here we have the idea of universal values of France, which, and we know that Macron is fighting at the moment to promote this, continue to promote this idea. And on the other hand, we have with Switzerland in Europe very clearly is a country which has always been supporting these values as well, which has always been the center of these international organizations. Rather than making a recommendation to Switzerland, we could use this for our next session. We would have a real working session between us where we would align these elements to try to get something to emerge in of that kind. The next major event of the IFGR will be this Living with Rivers festival that we want to organize in 2022 in France, which also, not only in France, but because we'll have Senegal and the St. Lawrence River will also be directly participating in the project, and the Rhone as well. I'd just like to say once more on that point, we have a precise project. This is a precise project in the Museum of Confluences. It's a great word, that confluence is not the Museum of Corrections, it's the Museum of Confluences. It's not a whip, it's a confluence. I just wanted to react. We were talking about CNR. I think Julien may be wrong. I don't think there is an example I think there are good points, positive points in what you've said. There are some things that are correct and others that are not so good about concerning the CNR. I love this company, but there are also some negative things to say about CNR. We shouldn't think that all the solutions will come from Europe. All of the rivers are different. Each river has to be analyzed on the basis of the examples we can take from different countries. I agree with you that we need to do that work, but I don't agree when you talk about it being an example. I don't agree with that. We're not an example. Irina now. Irina has to take a taxi to the airport afterwards, so.
Should I say something? Because after all these nice words about governance, international cooperation, etc., actually my thoughts were completely different. They concern health. We haven't talked about demographic trends in Switzerland, and we haven't talked about how healthy people are. And yesterday I said I missed in the project this part for swimming in the river. And I think if the young generation swims, they will become healthier, they will use less medical drugs, and wastewater will be cleaner, there will be less money for treatment of wastewater. So this cycle and chain is really not fully investigated. And this is something that we should think of to prevent taking so many drugs, to prevent polluting wastewater and receiving waters, rivers, lakes, and environment, of course, yeah. I'm not sure that this is good, if this fits the session, because the talks were about something else, but I just wanted to share my thoughts. And to say, everybody, thank you, and it was great to see you again, really. I feel alive. Okay.
C'est vrai qu'on peut imaginer, sans que ça soit contradictoire, mais que...
Without it being contradictory, we could imagine places where people could swim near into the places where people have treatment for heroin. Very briefly, just reading looking at the conditions for a successful alliance, I want to say something which might seem rather ordinary. It seems to me this is a question of the integrated approach. This is what we need to adopt. Goodbye, Irina and Julia. Bye-bye. See you. I think that whether we look at Europe or elsewhere, there's always two incorrect approaches, either looking at Geneva as being an example, or having national or transnational projects where there are movements of populations. Seems to me that's a fairly obvious thing to say. We need to have this integrated approach. But nevertheless, as I've already said yesterday, I did very much appreciate this right to take initiatives, and this integrated approach means we don't do the most difficult things first. Often, intellectually, we torture ourselves and trying to doing the most difficult things first. Maybe it's better to do the easy things first, to open up the possibilities. I suggest we have one more contribution from Erik to bring our session to an end. Well, quite honestly, I think we've done pretty well so far. I think even for a Swiss state councillor, because a French state councillor would be completely submerged because it doesn't have enough aquatic culture as they do here. You would be drowning. So thank you very much for all these interesting contributions. Thank you very much, everybody. We'll see you later. And see this state councillor. I know other state councillors in Switzerland. He's really pretty amazing. You'll see. I met him. I saw him at the Bandi Paki. He went there, so he must be a good guy. Imagine what he's like. A state councillor who's a sense of general interest. He loves fondue. I'd just like to. I have. It's a family affair. It's a family affair. We're a family here. You're the head of the family. No. 2 quick points. First point is to say thank you, and I understand that apparently that thank you is a very important word for Erik, as we heard. I'd like to say thank you to my young Genevan brother, Gilles, for this African welcome. Thank you very much. That's quite a compliment. Everything, the stars have aligned to make sure we have a fantastic welcome. Very modestly, I didn't bring the sun with me from Africa. The sun, but this is with Swiss precision. The sun arrived. The session was of excellent quality in my name and on behalf of my elder brother, Cabinet. I shouldn't really talk before him, but I wanted to thank you, and you, Nathalie, and all your teams. And above all, as we say in my country, you can thank somebody even for the work he's done for himself. Aziz and Marie-Cécile as well. They are hinge pins without which the IFGR wouldn't be able to function. I'm very proud to belong to this organization. I said this during one of the sessions. For me, this means a great deal. I know everybody here is very, very busy. If I've come I've travelled to this place, it's because, quite honestly, and I wasn't joking, at the OMVS, we want to be known worldwide through the Nobel Peace Prize. And we hope this will be possible thanks to Erik. I think this Nobel Prize, we've seen that whenever the prize is given to a political leader, he then becomes a war leader. It's easier to give the Nobel Prize to an organization which brings together 4 African countries with working on an extremely vulnerable river, which is a factor for peace and integration. As an African, very often there's not much good news coming out of Africa, and especially as the media deform everything. One of the things in Africa that does work, there are many of these, and OMVS is one of these success stories in Africa. And this is thanks to many, many people and to the founding fathers. Went to Patelon, I saw 4 palm trees that were planted in 1968. 4 heads of state went there to the Lab Day in very difficult conditions at the time because it was very difficult to go there. They planted 4 palm trees that are still growing today and which symbolize OMVS. And each country has its own boxes. There's one for the President Senghor, another one for President Duda, and the other one for President Sanka Touré. And it's thanks to this foundation, and I'm not saying we should do the same thing between France and Switzerland, but it's this message of hope that the OMVS wants to embody. And we hope that in this 50th anniversary, OMVS has existed for 50 years in very difficult conditions. Over the last 50 years, OMVS has continued. Tansier has been with us for 20 years in this organization, and it's still heading in the right direction. It's thanks to the new members and men like him. And Cabinet, not to mention Cabinet, his time at OMVS strengthened everything that had been done previously. I'd like to thank you for that because I'm leaving OMVS soon. My term of office came to an end in June, in fact. I asked if I could continue to December because I have another piece of work that I want to do, which is to save the Mali vessel, which is being lost. I want to join a team of patriots in Mali. I don't want to become the president of my country is in terrible trouble, and I can't stay in Dakar, even though it's the most intelligent solution for me. We say that God is the master of our destiny. I want to participate to help one of the most fantastic countries in Africa. Erik knows already how fantastic Mali is. I'm going to leave this fantastic job that I have in OMVS. I'll remain very close to OMVS. I will make sure that whoever replaces me understands the importance of IFGR. It's not a sacrifice to be part of this IFGR. It's important to make our voices be heard on a much broader scene. We have the African Organization of River Basins, because I believe in the peace that is brought by these organizations. If we look at Switzerland, is the leader of this hydro diplomacy through the concept based on peace, with very strong collaboration with the Swiss and with the Swiss ambassador. I think the next High Commissioner, believe me, will be just as involved and committed as I am. If it's not the case, I will encourage him to become more committed and involved. And I will always be an ambassador for IFGR. And I would like to thank all of you, and it's a fantastic adventure that you're all involved in. And what could be better than an organization that prevents war? The war of water has already begun. We have to pray that this war will not cause too many disasters as other wars have done in the past. It's better to prevent than to cure. I'll end with an African saying. We say, I think the Chinese say this as well, that it's better to walk limping along the right road than to walk quickly along the wrong road. Thank you. I will answer you with another saying from Brittany, from the Côte d'Amour. I'm not sure who it comes from. It says, the only true thank yous are mutual. It's a great honor to have met you. You're one of these people who enable us to grow. Even myself, I only measure 1 meter 73 centimeters. Of course, we will remain at your side in a nourishing brotherhood. The times that are coming will be difficult for us in West Africa. Times are going to be hard. We need to remain together, because what is going to happen is not good. And the recent attack on the 28th of September was something that cut me to the heart, to the quick, because where that convoy was attacked and where the vehicles were burned is a place I've been through there 20 times to go to Kai. My other country, my other family is at Yamamene. So we are here, we will remain here with you. Those who joined IFGR know this. We can say it as a family or a boat that immediately takes people on. And that's why we are so pleased to welcome our friend from Brazil and our friend from the Great Lakes of Kivu. You've seen that over the last 2 years, thanks to Marie-Cécile and Aziz, we've continued. We could have imagined that the links would become weaker. Not at all. We realized how much we need each other. My absolute conviction that we are nothing without others. So it's this team, this crew, that we are all participating, and I'll hand over to you in cabinet in a moment. We're going to stop for a few moments because the State Councillor is going to arrive. We'll have a quick coffee, which we all deserve. We hope we will see you very, very soon. Inshallah, as we say in Brittany.
So, welcome everyone. We welcome back Antonio Hodgers, Councillor of State, and we want to thank everyone who has made this session possible. Of course, all members of the IFGR are delighted to have been able to hold their meeting here and in person. And we want to thank all of our partners who have made this such a wonderful week, very productive, very instructive. We thank all of the local partners, be it the SIG, the University of Geneva, CIPEL, with Audrey Klein, and representatives of the Vaud and Valais cantons. We had many very in-depth presentations. We have learned a great deal. We asked a lot of questions, and so we would now like to give you a restitution, a summary of what we have learned, and if you will allow us to present our suggestions. So I will hand over to Erik. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. No, I am so happy to be here in Geneva because it is a place of the birth of waters, as the origin of the word indicates. And we are at the Nautical Society Clubhouse. And for me, I think we need to conduct ourselves as if we were on water, because we have to be humble before this great force, which is water. And we certainly have to be humble in the face of the force of water in all its forms. But particularly, I'm proud. When we look at the origin of the word proud as well, it comes in French, in Latin, from ferocious. But that's about action. I like to see that as an action word. And the Nigerian Soyinka Nobel Prize winner, Soyinka, said a wonderful thing. He said that we can think a lot about negritude as we can about tigritude, but at the end, it's the tiger at the end of the day is going to eat its prey. So here, I think what he means by that is that it's a good thing to understand, but it's even better to take action to protect everything that we have been studying. So we're not going to give you a restitution in the normal sense of the word. We are going to tell you about a dialogue. And we want to begin by saluting, honoring all of the incredible work that you do here, the fine example of an alliance between a river, a lake, and a city. What is this alliance? It means that, well, we can see this in our own family lives. It's not always such an easy relationship, but we've got all of the same elements here. So we have diversity and life forms that are one in the same. It's all a single thing. And as we have learned from the COVID virus, excuse me, guilty of not turning off my phone. So I'm going to tell Emmanuel Macron that he will have to wait. I'll call him back later. So we have to understand that we also have this dichotomy: the gentleness and yet the violence, the fear and yet safety. We have the short term, the long term. We have seen the experiences. New technologies and new ways that you're using to use the cold water from the bottom of the lake to cool buildings. And, well, can that continue for the long term? Will such installation be sufficient? We don't know. There's the question of democracy and efficiency. Of course, we're all very attached to democracy. But if democracy proves powerless, well, people then demand efficiency and unfortunately expect strongmen to impose efficiency. So it's not enough. The more we move forward, the more our relationship is closer, but the more we must take action together now that trust has been established. So I would like to say, dear Mr. State Councillor Antonio Hodgers, and you are much more important than a French Councillor of State, as I have reminded our group here. So our proposals and recommendations. First of all, we began our group around rivers and the great rivers, and obviously we have often talked about lakes and included them because a lake is a step, it's a stage in the life of a river, and it changes the river for better or for worse. In the same way as when a river runs through a city, it is changed, rarely for the better. And so this brings us to that question of the unity of life, one life. This also reminds us, to the great surprise of the presidents of the CNR, when we came for the first time to see the glacier up at the source of the Rhone, with with the strategic committee of the Rhone, we realized that 2/3 of that strategic committee had never been there, and yet they managed the river. What does that mean? They're managing the river without a complete vision. We often talk about the integrated management of the CNR, but if you don't have a complete vision, well, how does that work? You know, and it's also, we are now saying in the medical world that generalists are becoming a specialty, but you have to understand the whole body, and that's a specialty unto itself. Now, if we look at the Valley Canton side, well, you know, we know that the French are concerned, but do the French people know what's going on in terms of the third correction? That's one point. Next is the question of appropriation in the sense of adherence to a project. So we don't care for the word of ownership of the river, but at the same time, there has to be a feeling of ownership, of general ownership, and a lot of works around cities, a lot of their work in the urban redesigns is to give back the rivers to the inhabitants of the cities. So when we talk about mobility, for example, seagulls have their mobility, but unfortunately we can't fly like that. We have to look at all of these different forms of the mobility. We have museums of mobility, and I have said that the Lake Geneva Museum is extraordinary because what is poetry? It's a meta knowledge, and of course I respect engineers. And particularly, Gilles has mentioned that the Swiss are sensitive engineers. So, and I know who they are. They're very sensitive. So that's another point. Then, public opinion. Are you sure that what you're doing under the very respectable banner of general interest, is that what people want? And who wants this? Now, I am very attached to representative democracy, but is that enough? We have seen this on the climate conventions. It seemed like it was just a picking people randomly and saying that they're representative, but it didn't seem very real to me. But we have heard members here in our group saying we have to listen to the silence and listen to those who are silent, because otherwise we risk complete and utter rejection. There can be, little by little, this accumulation of things which they do not accept, which they do not see as legitimate. And so if we, as we've seen with the vaccinations, if we don't explain them fully, there are a lot of people who reject them. And I know this full well as a member of the Institut Pasteur. So as soon as you're talking about water issues, you are touching on something incredibly sensitive in our relationship with the water. There's also the point of governance, which is absolutely fascinating here. I mean, I am a Frenchman, but I don't believe in the centralist Jacobean approach. And here it's quite the opposite. In fact, and I've heard this sentence that drives me crazy in Paris, particularly at the Ministry of Finance, who will say, we know better than you and we can do it more cheaply. And whereas here in Switzerland, we can see this fragmentation. I mean, the French have many, many horizontal layers, so yours is more horizontal. And I think perhaps we could have a world pastry competition of these layer cakes, in fact. So we've got the horizontal layer cake in France, and the horizontal layer cake of the Swiss. So that's one of my suggestions. That's I'm so inspired this morning. So I want everyone's happiness, and I think that our pastry competition could do it. Then there's also the question of time. We have our territorial notions, but then there's also the notion of time. And what do we mean when we say sustainable or durable? And what are the signs that something will not have a long duration? So where are the signs of this? We have to put our finger on those signs that the durable might not be so durable and the sustainable not so sustainable. And so perhaps we need to ask the question, what would a serious crisis look like? Coming from the lake or whatever in 2050. Because when you've got these little alarm signals, you can learn a lot from them. So we might be saying, well, people hate thinking of the worst, and they don't want to think about the worst possible scenario. And they just want to think that what they know now will last forever. And there's another psychological mechanism at work here, and that is that you have to, believe, that we don't even believe what we know. We know we're mortal, and I want to particularly thank the emergency services at the hospital of Martigny when I had a heart flutter recently. So we know we're mortal, but we don't want to think about it, and we don't even really want to believe it, even though we know it. And it's the same thing here. There are things that we know, but we don't want to believe it. So what about our vocabulary? We've seen that when you use certain words, you are framing your entire way of thinking about a question. And so when you talk about correction, your third correction of the Rhone, this forces you to think in a certain way, and it's even worse than just mastery or control when you talk about a correction. And so, you know, our connection to the river should not be guided by pulling out a whip to train or correct the river. And we were talking about this morning. And when this morning we touched also on the digital transition, and I have said very seriously that if women are not amongst our digital programmers, well, it's going to be men who are going to fully control women. And so everything that has been won for women's rights will be lost in this digital battle. And so we have to manage that binary language as well. And I hand over now to the Council of State, and I wish you all the best. So I told you this was going to be a challenge, that this wouldn't be an easy meeting to attend. I've rarely taken so many notes, in fact. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleague, Councillor of State. Well, first of all, I thank you very much for your praise of what we have constructed together here. Everything that has been done around the lake and along the Rhone, you know, Julius Caesar came here, of course, you know, on the left bank, and the Helvetians were on the other bank of the lake, and he battled his way through. We have the Alambrouge, who are another people here, but he was facing a very diverse people on the other side of the lake. I don't know if they're in layers, but in any case, they are certainly an integral part of our nation. So this shared governance, of course, you find this across the different cantons, and when we discuss these questions of governance, well, the Rhone, okay, you know, there's the French side, there are the challenges of the sediment and quality and flow rates. Well, it was explained to me that in the 1970s, the Swiss, well, the cantons, as you've heard, it's the cantons, it's not the confederation. So we've already got this sharing going on. And France didn't originally want to participate in this, and we thought, okay, well, the Swiss cantons will work together. Geneva, Vaud, Valais, fine. Well, and well, then the French, well, they'll deal with things on their side. But you know, now today, legitimately, the French state has said, oh, well, it'd be nice that we could participate in this governance, and this is only fair. Of course, I mean, this is not the official Swiss position on the matter, but ethically, we can never refuse a neighbor their right to participate in governance on a shared resource. And I think otherwise this can only result in war. So, you know, reducing water, damaging the quality of water, these are factors that lead to war. And when we create distress, when we are attacking life in all forms, not just human life, when we're attacking the lives of others, well, then this requires participation. So it's true that we know that overall there is a good functioning between our two governments. This is the result of our history and our efforts to understand each other and to reach across the borders. And when we are talking about, the rivers that transforms, that enters the lake as it exits the lakes, and as you've said, when it runs through a city, it's rarely a positive impact on the river. So we must keep in mind that we must return the river. We use that idea of leaving a thing as clean as you found it, but we can do even better than that, in fact. And so I think these are principles that should guide us in our relationship. There's a co-responsibility. And of course, the local authorities, the towns that are alongside the river, they have a responsibility as well to preserve the quality. They receive what has been done upstream, but they have a responsibility to those who are downstream as well. So perhaps we will take an approach that can be very sectorial. I myself have not been to the glacier. Okay, well, let's go. Let's go there. Okay. Okay, for us in Geneva, we consider the Valais, it's a bit like Corsica. Okay, so careful. So I'm I know my place. I know. Well, I'm preparing his visa. Let me just quickly call to get his visa. But I think we have been pragmatic, and I really want to thank the SIG and all of the Canton representatives here for their pragmatic work together. But will that be enough? Will that continue to work as well? What will the Rhone and Lake Geneva be like in 2050? We're expecting temperatures to rise to the point where it's like Naples here, and at the end of the century would be the equivalent of North Africa. And this is an intermediate scenario, in fact. And those are not the most pessimistic of scenarios. This really that demands our attention. So having some, we're going to have to probably have stricter rules around our existence and our usage of the rivers and lakes. And this is important in democracy to set a framework. We know that the harshness of the climate change to come are going to be an extreme challenge to our democracies. And in Switzerland, of course, there's a tradition of optimism. Careful, but optimistic nonetheless in the face of a certain risk, and because it's the Swiss people have had a peaceful history, to have navigated our way through two world conflicts. That we have also, we have our great expertise in the pharmaceuticals and banking and diplomacy. And so, the Swiss will say, okay, this is, how can we maintain the Swiss model if everyone has to suffer a 30% drop in their income? what becomes of this so-called Swiss model. And we know that the access to resources is going to become tougher, and this could make some people more aggressive. And so if we haven't, between the state and our local authorities and between our peoples, if we don't have if we haven't put in place a governance that helps us resolve these tough issues, then we are heading for serious conflict. Yeah. Okay, but we have these notions about the resources that are very territorial when we talk about the ground. But what about water? It flows by us. It's a different notion. And so here, we know and we can see the first signs of coming hardness, and we're already hearing from our citizens growing demands. But there's a whole political culture beyond even our institutions that are going to have to adapt to these coming difficulties. You talked about that layer cake that we call federalism. It has a cost. In many ways, it can cost more in many senses, but it does have the advantage of getting people to join in or adhere to a shared project. And so public opinion isn't just interpreted by politicians as something as, between the opinion surveys and social media and debates, and I keep an eye. I watch French policy a great deal. We keep here, and the French politician will say, "Oh, French people want this, they want that," because you would never hear that in France. In Switzerland, because they won't allow you to speak in the name of the entire Swiss people. And so we've got a very different political culture. It's true. But the Swiss were sort of there's a false modesty here. And we have a very Rousseau notion. I'm a state councillor. We've got municipal councillors. We've got confederation councillors. But we're all considered councillors in the sense of advisors to a sovereign people. We are not governors, in fact. And I think that relationship with the Swiss people means that our relationship to the opinion of our inhabitants in a town or a canton is built differently. Of course, we are also faced with various contradictions. Public opinion is a changing thing. It's versatile. They might think one thing one day, and the next day they might think something else, and they might not see a contradiction. But when you're in a government and you're trying to implement or do something in the face of certain expectations and demands, well, this is what we see with water. We need the water for agriculture and drinking water. We want to be able to bathe in it. We want it for recreation and for industry, for tourism. We want water for heat pump systems. People want water for an awful lot of things. And all of these expectations are legitimate, each and every one of them, but then there's going to have to be the need to set some priorities. Does agriculture come before industry? If we have to make hard choices, is water quality more important than recreation? And so, of course, there is this natural desire, for access, but we have to protect nature and biodiversity. How do we explain that to people? And on the lake shores as well. In Geneva, we have, wanted to ensure access, and yet there's a lot of private access that we haven't been able to prevent or take back. So those create tensions as well. One, you want a democratic, a wide open access to our lake shores. So there's still plenty of work to be done to establish some sort of a balance. So I am also attentive to vocabulary, and we might not say correction of the Rhone, but we might say the cleaning, treating of the water. Or we should be talking about renaturing, but it's true that, well, the words, you're right, have their a meaning, and there's a certain ambivalence in our relationship to nature, and that there's this idea that we can come back to an earlier condition. We know that the status quo cannot be maintained, and it's not even desirable. And in fact, what we must do is take this the existing situation to work toward a world of the future that will be more gentle toward nature, because going back isn't the solution or even possible. Sometimes we're just trying to recreate something in a way that might lead to our great loss. In fact, so that's my first response to what you have presented to me. Now, Etienne Klein recently said something about coding. He said that we have an official recognition of a woman as one of the original, around 1830s in England. A 27-year-old woman was the first to create coding. So let's not forget her, and let's create many more like her. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak.
So I think that if you want to respond to the first point, the second point, we're going to talk about international cooperation. So this first part of our session, there's been a successful alliance. How do we think it could be further improved? So I'll hand over now to the audience for these points. And always, of course, Elizabeth as well. I just want to go back to the subject of governance. This morning, we were saying amongst ourselves, and you're right, there is no question of being an example or a model that is perfect. We're not saying that one model is better than another, and that one system can be applied to all rivers. What has struck me, and I would like to emphasize this, is that ever since I've observed the Rhone, it's not a Franco-Swiss river, it's in three parts. One part, which is before the Lake Geneva, there's the Lake Geneva, and then there's the French Rhone. And in terms of governance, I understand that there could be local actions on these three segments, but I think Gilles was saying this morning there are about 40 organizations and associations managing the Lake Geneva. I don't know how many are managing the Rhone before it gets to the lake. In France, we have about the same figure for the French part of the river. I think in terms of governance, without wanting to centralize anything, I think that something could perhaps be set up to bring all of these entities together. We have Erik from CNR, who showed me the number of organizations working on water policy along the Rhone. In terms of a layer cake, we also have the cream, the chantilly cream in the middle. We're French, we like cream. And I don't know how it could really work, because in problems of governance, we are talking about individuals and not only systems. Each individual wants their system to take priority over the others. Just wanted to add something relating to your answer, to say that governance of their own isn't just one border, there are two borders. Who would like to take the floor? I'd like to welcome those of us who are with us online. Catherine Daniel, who's a professor at the University of Canberra in Australia. We talked about the underneath and above. Here we're talking about the underneath the planet. She's underneath the planet. And we have Jean-Louis Chaussade, who is, I would like to greet him very warmly, the previous CEO of Suez, who knows one or two things about water, as you can imagine. Thank you. Can I just say something to react to what Elizabeth said? She said the river was in 3 segments. In the fact, the river is in 4 segments, because its impact on the Mediterranean and the Mediterranean ecosystems is absolutely huge. When you look at a river, you have to look at it from its birth to its end, its mouth. The importance of rivers today lies in its capacity to maintain the ecosystems that exist right along the river, including the point when they enter the sea. I absolutely agree with what you've said, of course, yes. Perhaps now I will move on to the second part, which is cooperation. Why? As you said, Antonio, let's think of a possible first nightmare, the 30% reduction of the average wage in Switzerland. Would peace continue to reign? Would the general climate for serenity perhaps be somewhat deteriorated? Let's add to that, which is not at all improbable. Could we perhaps also add an increase in temperature? So a reduction in the water quantity. This would lead to tension being applied to the different types of use when there's less water, and so there's more pollution, etc., etc. What would happen? We talked about weak signals this morning. Weak signals is a very inappropriate term, because these weak signals are screaming at us. They're not weak at all. So we have to hear these weak signals, so-called. So what is sustainable? That's when we talk about Geneva in 2050. This is an interesting exercise. So with that outlook, to pacify the level of violence within each of our countries and with regard to the rest of the world, the solution is cooperation. And as here we have very rich experience in many, many different areas of sharing of data, etc. Okay, so the solution is cooperation. Ideas have been suggested, and others could be suggested too, of course. And at the IFGR, we are perfectly ready to look at the projects that have been selected and to get our members to participate in them, because they come from right around the world. At the IFGR, we have organized actions following requests from members from other countries, such as China, on the Yellow River, which no longer reached the sea. What would be the solution there to return the basic function of the river to reach the sea? How do we deal with all of the sediment that is accumulated, which means you have a race between the riverbed and the dunes, and then everything gets blocked. The river no longer gets to the sea. When an embankment collapses, you can have 100,000 people killed. You can imagine what this means in all different areas. And the terrible situation for the insurance companies in that case. So the first thought is to look at things from the point of view of a catchment basin, even for a Rhone River, where everybody gets on fairly well, to look at the river from the glacier to the Camargue, and not as in being in several parts. Because even for us, who present ourselves as being models, we have our vision, we have an integrative vision, and we have a segmented vision. Life doesn't segment things. If we're going to understand anything about this pandemic, life has no borders. All of these things are some things that have been invented by us. So the basin is the most important thing, the river basin. So our conviction, which was asserted even more when we went to the UN the other day, is that the right scale to work on is the river basin. When, as you said very rightly, when you look at there are 10 dams in China on the river of the Mekong, to preventing water getting to the delta in Vietnam, where there are 60% of rice production. Obviously, that is going to create tensions. There's less water the greater the risk of war increases. So that's the first point. The second point is twinning. I'm very familiar with twinning, and I've seen what happens between two cities, for example. Between Bamako and Angers, for example, occasionally, it doesn't always happen, sometimes there are two possibilities. You can reduce the level of corruption because there are direct relations, and secondly, there's a double learning process for Bamako to learn about what Angers is when people from Mali arrive in Angers. It's a bit strange for them, but the reverse is true as well. When you send pupils from Angers going to Bamako, they're very, very surprised. So, I know about twinning. In a crazy dream, I could imagine a twinning between Lake Geneva and Lake Chad. In other words, a beautiful, peaceful place, and a place where nothing could be worse. There are tensions in every single field. This is a crazy dream I have. Maybe we can talk about that. How do we talk to each other? How do we find solutions? I love to be as foreign, to discover things that are as foreign and as different from me as possible. Who are we when I'm faced with somebody else who is so different from me? We're all human beings. I've succeeded in getting close to the Chad, protected by military escort and armored vehicles. I wasn't get to Lake Chad because it was so dangerous because of Boko Haram. So we have this question of twinning. That's a possibility. The third possibility is culture. This strikes me to the heart because I'm a writer occasionally and also work on music increasingly. What strikes me in the actions we're seeing at the moment is that I have a friend who's written a wonderful book, who was the Africa manager for the World Bank, Serge Mikhailov. He wrote a visionary book called Africanistan. That's where we are at the moment. And who are these people's enemies? They are our enemies. Who are their enemies? They have three enemies. And in fact, it's the same enemy each time. Their first enemy, they hate women. They can't stand music. And they attack rivers. We were all extremely shocked when the day before yesterday we heard the terrible news of an attack on the Organization for Protection of the Senegal River. They attacked a convoy of material which was being brought to help build a new dam to be filled with water. They attack women, music, and rivers. Why is that? Because they are attacking life itself. It's the same thing in this madness. So culture, what is it? Perhaps we have one of the greatest jazz festivals in the world in Montreux. What is jazz? Jazz is the exact opposite. It's a dialogue between cultures. I was in the north of Mopti at Fouquet with Alefé Katouro and Aïkouda. That's what jazz is. There is a dialogue thanks to blues, African blues talking to the blues from the United States. That's what culture is. These festivals that we have are places where people can express their brotherhood and fraternity, because often people don't know what jazz is. I'm fighting to explain how important music is. Doesn't mean you can't listen, but when you listen, you can think about what you're doing as well. And so we could imagine something in that area of culture. And also, I'm sorry to be so incredibly enthusiastic. As my cardiologist can tell you, it can be dangerous. In Geneva, I'll stop talking after this, but in Geneva is water. Geneva has to be the world capital of rivers. It is the platform. That's where it was born, and it's giving back what it received at birth. Why am I so passionate about rivers after having spent 2.5 hours going around the world talking about the history of water? For a very simple reason. Water is an absolutely necessary element, but it's quite abstract. A river is a person. The river is a living being. You can't appropriate water. You can't take ownership of water. You can take ownership of a river. You can be a godfather or godmother to a river. That's all I have to say. Thank you. Yes, over to you, Antonio. What do you have to say? I don't want to add anything. I have nothing to say, because you have said very important things. Everything has been said. I think we've had this discussion with the audience. I've noted the ideas of twinning cooperation, culture, and music. This leads you to your conclusion. We already have this link to some extent, but the important thing is emotional link, and this link based on our identity with our river and our lake. When I say identity, and this is where we go back to the idea of governance, it's not our river as people from Geneva, it's not yours because you are French, it's ours, it belongs to all of us, from the glacier right down to the Camargue. I think the cultural question has a role to play, and as you explained, it's important to see what is happening in Chad. It's a little-known situation for the general public here. Perhaps we could illustrate the weaknesses and what is at stake, and also look at the challenges that will become more and more difficult in the future. Geneva as the capital of rivers. I've noted that one. I'll talk to the Swiss Confederation about that. There is a need to ramp up our activity and change gears in our activity to do with rivers. Yes, absolutely. Over to you in our audience. We have a microphone for you to take the floor. But please tell us who you are and your specialization. We have our local partners from France and Switzerland as well. So please tell us who you are before you give your comment or question. Thank you. Thank you. My name is Philip Rock, previously Secretary of the Environment for Switzerland, which is very active in this international field of water. I'd just like to congratulate you for your extraordinary initiative. I'm very pleased to see that yesterday and today you are capable of bringing people together. That's your first objective, and I congratulate you on that, of bringing people together around rivers on a planetary scale. And also this that I've had a chance to talk about with Elizabeth earlier, the idea of bringing together specializations. Often people work too much in their own sector, and it's important to talk about rivers in a holistic way. I congratulate you on that too. I wanted to, in fact, just say about something about an artist and a naturalist and an engraver, and also a philosopher in Geneva, who from the 1930s onwards was very interested in the future of the planet and nature. He was a pioneer in these questions. And he courageously talked to all the different people in society and asked them the question, what about nature? the natural environment. Are you thinking of the consequences of what you're doing for the natural environment? I'm very pleased to see that in your publications, this idea of the value of ecosystems is promoted to supply rivers so that the water cycle is harmonious. You really do take that into account. I just wanted to highlight the fact that I'm very pleased that you have continued to highlight this importance. There can be no peace in the area of water. Rivers can only be useful if we maintain the sources, the ecosystems, forests and wetlands that are around these rivers. I'm very pleased to welcome Robert Hénard, who was this pioneer from Geneva. And thank you all also for everything that you do. Wonderful when you talk about this person, Robert Hénard, who was an engraver of the ephemeral. Thank you very much. I'm very impressed to see that we have our state councillors, and they get on very well together from France and Switzerland. Great understanding between you two. As soon as one of you says anything, the other agrees immediately. I'd like to focus on one component of the Swiss cooperation for the benefit of communication and outreach to do with water, because we had Swiss funding which enabled the water panel to make an extraordinary report. The committee was chaired by the former president of Slovenia, Daniel Tetuk, who was previously a former Secretary General of the UN. This document is extremely relevant to today's situation. I really think it's important to read it and disseminate it around the world. I'd like to encourage Switzerland to continue financing the important role of river basins. Not all countries finance this. Clearly, until we have resolved this, and until we look at the problem of water in terms of river basins, it will not be possible to preserve peace and the different types of use. There's a very violent daily situation in Africa around water because of the interests of the different countries, and not many studies have been made of this situation. And I'd like to encourage the Swiss cooperation authorities to put in a little bit of money to better understand this phenomenon and to deal with it. Boko Haram is an organization you've heard of. They kill less people than conflicts between breeders and farmers in our country. Well, 1,500 people per day are killed due to these conflicts between the breeders and farmers, because with the increasing desertification, the places where animals are grazing become places where there is war, and this is going to become worse because of climate change. It's a huge problem in Africa. There's very few studies that have been done on this, the situation, to help the governments of these countries to reorganize the arrangements for grazing animals so that the breeders and the farmers are able to come to an agreement. And living together creates huge risks in this country, not only in Nigeria. It's also a problem in my country, in Guinea. Despite that, pastoral agriculture is in danger. This is the same in Senegal. It's worse, even worse in Mali, in Cameroon as well. It's an internal war centered on water, and is becoming increasingly acute, threatening the very existence of our countries. I would like to take advantage of your presence here today to encourage Switzerland, which has always worked on water issues in a very global way, but which perhaps is not so familiar with what can be done. I would be very pleased if Switzerland could look at this issue, because these are huge dangers which are increasing every day. Thank you very much, Cabinet. If I may say so, the jihad, the field for jihad is water, and the lack of water and the conflicts around water. The jihad has attached itself to these conflicts. between the breeders, the nomadic breeders and herders and the farmers. And so when there's a conflict, they attack each other when there's a water shortage. And this is something that is very little, not so very well known. And as usual, to deal with the phenomena, we do so without looking at what is actually the root cause of this problem, of these conflicts. Thank you very much. Dominique Béraud from the World Meteorological Organization, in charge of monitoring of the land and systems, including the Valois, Canton, wherever you may be. The role of this World Meteorological Organization is to allow cooperation and collaboration. So we are in this context, and it is to help countries to develop and collaborate together. What we have to say is that it doesn't always work very well, and it doesn't work for very long either. So we have to have a paradigm shift in the way we operate. Today we talk a lot about artificial intelligence, which doesn't remain anything but natural stupidity. Was something I've observed this week with all of these people and at IFGR is the collective intelligence, and I think this goes beyond collaboration and cooperation. This collective intelligence, this capacity to listen and to be together, this is what is going to enable us to move forward for many years to come in a sustainable way. This isn't the first time we've talked about cooperation and collaboration. We're talking about it here. We have to make it more concrete. This in collective intelligence in all its diversity is something that will make a difference. So I think this is important to bear in mind. Thank you. Thank you. Are there any other contributions?
Hello, everyone. I'm Claire Vial. I'm a farmer, member of IFGR, various responsibilities in France on agricultural research. And since the month of June, I've been very privileged to preside over some work that was commissioned in France under the Ministry of Agriculture and Environment that concerns climate change. So, as you have no doubt observed, for the past 2 years, the FAO has tried to draw attention to growing hunger around the world. We had hoped that many actions around the world had helped reduce hunger, but in fact, there are in many places and for many reasons that things are worsening. So for those of us in Europe who believe that we will not be exposed to that, well, I can tell you what the ministers in France are asking us to study now for 2050 is what can happen if we are also confronted with a lack of food caused by a lack of water. Our food sources could be sharply impacted. So I just want to tell you that in all of the different presentation talks that we've had this week, we didn't hear much from the private world, neither the industrial nor the farming world were present at our talks. But so even in our countries, I can tell you that we are now being asked to project a future where food supply will be challenged. If you look, all those fruits and vegetables that you enjoy, well, our forecasts tell us that, with 30% less flow in the Rhone, for example, is going to have an impact on energy, on drinking water and habitat, but also how can those responsible for food supply, how will they manage? And so it goes this forces us to seek out new solutions. Can I comment on what Anne-Claire just said? Now, we have had some very interesting presentations on data while we were here and how the data is used. So what I want to say is that we have a lot of data coming from all over the world, but the real question is what we do with that data. So we saw some great presentations that show that we can do amazing things with data. But when we talk about the Rhone and we know that there's going to be a lack of water, we have to look at who's going to use that data and how, because we know that the data can say one thing and something completely opposite. You know, yesterday with our friends at the SIG said that they don't see any lowering of the average flow rate of the Rhone. But, you know, so we can say that we expect to see a very little flow. You know, you can just take that data and say that there is no decline in the average flow rate of the Rhone. However, when we hear Anne-Claire, when we as river managers, we can say that an average means nothing. It doesn't tell you how the river is changing. What we need to look is the huge variability in the flow rate. And our friends at the SIG told us as well, we simply cannot predict what's going to happen. July this year was very wet, but next year it could be extremely dry. We can go from flooding to drought. And yet our average might look fine. And so for the farming world, this is a huge challenge, because if you only think in averages, you are not paying attention to the surplus or the deficit of water in different seasons. Okay, so you can't just sit back and think that an average is reassuring. And so thank you, Dominique, for raising this point as well. So, and there isn't just the technical side of things. And so the presentations on data I found fascinating, because in every country we have data, but we don't exactly know what's going to be done with that data. Sometimes it's being used against the general interest. I'm Aurélie Charignon. I'm a councillor of a town in Gex on the French side. I'd like to come back to something Elizabeth has just said. And it's true that the debates that we hear across Europe, in fact, is where do we identify the balance? You know, when we hear, oh, well, we have to keep allowing fertilizers because otherwise our food production will be lower. But you know, we don't know how to strike the best balance. And so people have to be more aware. You know, as a local elected official, you know, our inhabitants, you know, tell us of their fears, and we have to inform them of the risk of floods and droughts, etc. And this is, you know, here I've just discovered your work here at the IFGR, and your approach is really positive. And so for our future generations, you know, there's a lot of concern. It's terrible to think that we could be limiting their hopes and their ambitions. You know, we talk about pollution and debt. I mean, what are we leaving them? What can their hopes be in the face of all of these challenges. Whereas I think it is time for elected officials to tackle the environmental transition, really to take it on board as part of their priorities. Thank you so much for your comments, and I'd like to make an announcement. A world premiere is that we have a project with CIPEL, and we're going to write a story, and so we have a project together to explain what is the climate, and we're aiming for a story that will be for perhaps 10-year-old children. But we're going to try to move forward here. But yes, should we do it? Should we try to do it quickly or well? It's often hard to do both at the same time. So we want to talk. We're going to make it like a folk tale. We're going to pick an emblematic character to represent the rivers and the environment. And it's something that will raise young people's awareness. And we're going to pick an emblematic figure, for example, of a bird pairs. Often in bird couples, we know that it's often the male that sits and keeps the eggs warm while the female goes out. And so, all right, so our young people will, now have some new ideas for their future as well. So, Joël? So I'm not a member of this group, but I represent a think tank, the Bridge Tank, which is, a terrible choice for a French organization, but nonetheless, that's our name. Erik, thank you for your feminist approach. But yes, we have this shared problem, which is men in many instances. Which is why it is so important to have a good balance in all areas of life. And there are solutions out there. And of course, the elected officials have their responsibility to bear. We've talked about the Niger. There's also the central region of Mali, which faces huge conflicts between its sedentary peoples and its nomadic peoples. In 2017, Mrs. Khan submitted a report proposing solutions. It was a 40-page report. There was a 2-page executive summary that with even Emmanuel Macron read it, and nothing has been done. So it is important to talk about coalitions. We talk a lot about them. When we talk about greenhouse gas emissions and CO2 emissions, we've got the Conference of the Parties, and these coalitions must mobilize civil society, elected officials, etc. But we need tools to do this, and this is why I believe that the IFGR is a tool. And Erik, you mentioned the river basins. This is important to consider them across their entire length. And there is twinning. I'm a great believer in twinning and bridges. They build bridges. At the international level, I believe that coalitions at a very high level is important, and I believe in them, but there are two things we're missing. But we can't talk about CO2 and climate change and its impacts on the water as well without talking about its links all across the life chain. And so when we look at the projections for 2050, if we look at the water cycle and their connection with CO2, we've got the United Nations having a conference of the parties on greenhouse gas emissions and desertification, and another one on biodiversity. So all these different conference of the parties, okay? So it seems to me that, there need to be bridges between these conferences, and I think that water is what links it all. And so I think that the IFGR, thanks to its diversity and its men and women, are a tool. And so I believe it's very important that you step up to that global level. A final point on the layer cake. Now, France. We have not only the Jacobianism, this highly centralized system, but also this techno-centralization. And there, in 1995, there was a thesis written about the Swiss cooperation. Now, it's been buried in the third basement level down. Okay, that's what we do with all good projects, is we archive them. Okay, so we've all talked about, projects and cooperation, and we've got two members of the CNR with us, and we have a person here in charge of the general interest missions of many different types, in fact, and working very closely with people. And there's a person here as well, and I will put you in touch with the right people. So, and we have a professor here as well. So we have our princess, I call her a princess of general interest missions, who's doing fantastic work. So I am navigating in all these waters, but I'm generally kind of lazy and I'm driven by the wind. So it's not, but you're probably going to have to do a bit more rowing here. And he's a world champion in kayak, and who has taught me a lot about being more energetic, and it's really thanks to him that I've so, Mr. Champion, world champion, welcome. Can I say something about those missions of general interest and the? Okay, all right, kayaks, I might have a few words to say about that as well. But those general interest missions are run by the CNR. I think these can be rolled out around the world. And I think we need to talk more about what businesses are doing in the face of climate change. And, here we are exporting our pollution. We can ask companies to do what the public authorities don't want to do. But every company lives with and in its environment. And I think the problem is that they are often disconnected from nature, not all, of course. But there's one topic where the CNR company has been doing for a long time, well before my time, in fact, is to say that when we are making withdrawals from nature, we have to give back. It's not enough to make money and distribute money. Okay, distribute to the salaried staff, of course, but distributing to the state and shareholders is something else. But so it means we need to also be distributing to nature and the environment. So nature allows us to do many things and make money, and is up to give back. So I just wanted to explain a little bit about what we also do. and our philosophy at the CNR. Cabinet. I'm sorry to ask for the microphone a second time. Yes, so we know that there's a lot of worry and concern about what we're going to be facing soon. At the World Bank and the SFI, there has been a great deal of discussion around financing to help overcome the problems of water. And we believe that there is a need to create a World Bank for water. And that idea is moving forward. There's a board has been composed with 10 members, with ministries of the environment, and I myself am on that board of a World Bank for water, with its headquarters will be in Amsterdam. Studies have shown, particularly in the OECD, that the needs for funding in relation to water by 2030 is $6.7 trillion. And by 2050, it should be $22 trillion. And so, if we just look at the Western countries, you can imagine when what's going to happen when some of the troubles of the Southern Hemisphere arrive at your door. So this all has to be handled very urgently, and new strategies must be put in place. In particular, if you think about the currently very high cost of desalination, for example, we're going to have to build plants. These will cost billions of dollars. The needs are huge. And so this World Bank for Water is going to have to work very hard to try to fund all forms of installations and solutions, be it for research or installations for water savings, adapting to new water situations. There's a huge ambition there. And we hope that this bank will be up and running by next year. And it's going to be entering the financial arena. It will become absolutely necessary for humanity to adapt. Well, thank you so much, Cabinet, for talking to us about this. This is a very fine example of how all of this is interconnected. To desalinate, you need energy. Do you need 80 bars of pressure to project to get the water up a stream from the desalination points? It's absolutely astounding how much needs to be done. So this is why I've been working with the Foundation for the Sea. Why? For the very simple reason that when we talk about the one global health, well, where is all that plastic coming from? An entire continent of plastic, or is it coming from the rivers? Correction from Elizabeth, it's not coming from the rivers, it's coming from people. Okay, so the source of what's being thrown in the rivers is people. Okay. Yes, no, the river is not responsible for what's being thrown in the river. And so, between the IFGR and TARA and the Foundation for the Seas, we are developing a charter, and any candidates to municipal elections, and Mrs. Mayor, we hope you will sign as well, that you will commit to not throw any plastic into the rivers or anywhere else. In Marseille, with the IUCN meetings, and Marseille is the second largest city in France, has signed. Okay, Paris, Lyon has signed. Sorry, Lyon has signed. Okay, so I don't know who we need. Okay, we're trying to get the big French cities on board. And we would love to see, okay, no pressure, no pressure. I'm not pressuring her at all, but, you know, that's what we need to happen. When you think that the COP, the conferences of the parties were only looking at the quality of water and its temperature, that they weren't paying any attention to the ocean, it's terrifying, even though the connection is so obvious, and yet they're still thinking along those lines. For me, that drives me crazy, that they haven't understood that all of this is interconnected. I can't hear the speakers not using a microphone. Microphone, microphone, microphone. Microphone. Okay, you English speakers who are listening to the translation, you have to raise your voices when the translators can't hear. So, coming back to this charter, yes, all of the towns around the CPEL territory, we look at 50,000 tons of micro pollutants, a lot of it coming from plastics, are entering the river and the lake. So while I have the microphone, I would really like to sincerely thank the IFGR for having listened to all of the messages that we have presented here, all of the information. So, and we really thank you for also including lakes in your work. Secondly, I would like to thank Hamed. On Wednesday, what you said about Lake Geneva and what you told me about the Lake Chad, I was very touched by your testimonial and this idea of a twinning between Lake Geneva and Lake Chad. I want to say that I find that a wonderful idea. Thank you, Audrey. Thank you all. We're going to hear from Camille Morinque. You can see the images on the screen that we've been showing. We're coming back to our Rhône. Camille has done a wonderful photo report and that has been presented in Paris by the Luxembourg Park. Camille, thank you so much for inviting me. So you've been seeing my photos, and I think out of the 80 pictures that are being shown here that show the Rhône from the source to the Mediterranean, and I really thank all of the partners, the 3 Swiss cantons, and the CNR and the IFGR. There's nothing more beautiful than a river that you can follow like this. And so to better manage and preserve and understand a river, you have to go to the source and you have to follow it all the way to the mouth of the river. So, you know, perhaps it can be sliced up into 800 different parcels and how all of the different communities approach it, but it's really in its entirety that we can fully appreciate it. And so it's currently being shown in Paris. We hope that it can be shown elsewhere. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I would like to tell a little story that I found very funny. So it's being shown in Paris at the Luxembourg Gardens, and so people could see the pictures. And several times there were some French people saying, you know, have a very weak notion of geography. who saw all of these pictures of the run, and they said, "Oh, wow, isn't that amazing that we have all of that in France?" So I think there's a lot of education work to be done here amongst the French. And I think we mustn't forget something that's so essential as the beauty. What is more beautiful than a river? And and I have to keep repeating myself, but if the planet is in such a trouble, well, we should be inspired to protect all of this life and this beauty. So for me, this is why we have to show these pictures, to show that this is something worth fighting for, and that we must marvel at it, but we must protect it if we want to continue to have this marvelous thing that is a river. We are arriving toward the end of our session. I want to really thank Marie-Cécile for all of her hard work. It has been an immense pleasure for me. It was so wonderful to see everyone again after 2 years. We talk about climate urgency, and the 2 years that we weren't able to meet and make a contribution is a very long. So a great pleasure for me to host you all. And yesterday, we heard people say that, I was very touched to hear the Africans say that we were worthy of African hospitality. And that really touches me. The governance, I believe here we're seeing a governance of humanity, of the human side. I've seen the IFGR continue to move forward to make important contributions. So this was the 10th session. I hope our 11th session will be just as productive. And I certainly encourage the CIPEL to try to reach out to Lake Chad, to move away from our comfort zones, because we want to help others and help future generations. Thank you again, everyone. Thank you again, Elizabeth and Erik and Antonio, for leading the discussion today. Your great work together. You did an excellent job of summarizing everything that's been done and giving us a vision to the future. And we want to thank your cardiologist as well for keeping you with us, Erik. So, Jean-Louis, I wish I could give you a fraternal hug, and Catherine as well. I remember the first desalination plant that I saw was in Australia, and it was a very monumental task. Thank you for being with us. And so, thank you, everyone, and good journey home.
On vous invite maintenant à...
Thank you, everyone.